Game of Thrones redefined what television could be, largely because it was willing to do what other shows weren't: kill off major characters without warning or mercy. Today, I'm breaking down the 6 most shocking deaths from Game of Thrones, analyzing not just how these characters died, but why their deaths were so impactful and what they meant for the story. I've spent weeks rewatching these brutal moments, studying the books, and analyzing fan reactions to bring you the definitive explanation of Westeros' most jaw-dropping deaths. So grab your Valyrian steel and prepare yourself, because in Game of Thrones, when you play the Game of Thrones, you win or you die. Ned Stark's execution. Ned Stark's execution in Season 1 wasn't just shocking, it was revolutionary television that changed how stories are told. As the apparent protagonist and moral center of the show, Ned seemed untouchable. His death in Episode 9, Baelor, broke the unwritten rule that heroes survive at least until the finale. What made this death so impactful was how it was staged. After confessing to treason he didn't commit to save his daughters, Ned kneels before the Sept of Baelor, expecting mercy from the newly crowned King Joffrey. The camera lingers on Arya in the crowd, on Sansa pleading for her father's life, on Cersei realizing her son is about to go off script. When Joffrey orders, "Bring me his head," the shock ripples through every character and the audience. The execution itself is filmed with brutal efficiency. Sir Elend Payne draws ice, Ned's own greatsword. Yoren shields Arya's eyes. The blade falls. We see birds scattering in the sky, a moment of poetic beauty amid the horror, before cutting back to Arya's devastated face. The restraint in not showing the actual beheading somehow makes it more impactful. This death fundamentally transformed the story. Without Ned, the Stark children were scattered across Westeros, each forced to survive on their own. Robb called the banners and became king in the north, setting up the War of the Five Kings. Arya began her journey toward becoming a faceless assassin. Sansa became a hostage of the Lannisters, learning the brutal realities of power. Beyond the plot implications, Ned's death established Game of Thrones' central theme. In this world, honor and morality don't protect you. They make you vulnerable. Ned's rigid adherence to honor led directly to his downfall. He warned Cersei he knew her secret, giving her time to counterplot. He trusted Littlefinger despite warnings. He refused Renly's offer of troops that could have secured his coup. As Cersei told him in Episode 7, "When you play the Game of Thrones, you win or you die. There is no middle ground." Ned Stark never understood he was playing a game at all, and he paid the ultimate price for his naivety. The Red Wedding. If Ned Stark's death was shocking, the Red Wedding was traumatic. This massacre in Season 3's The Reigns of Castamere didn't just kill characters, it violated one of the oldest sacred traditions in Westeros, guest right. The setup was masterful. After Robb Stark broke his promise to marry a Frey daughter, he returned to the twins to apologize and offer his uncle Edmure as a replacement. The wedding feast seemed tense but successful. Then the doors closed, the musicians began playing The Reigns of Castamere, the Lannister victory song, and everything went to hell. What made this sequence so devastating was its intimate brutality. It begins with Catelyn noticing Roose Bolton's chainmail beneath his sleeve, a subtle detail that alerts her something is wrong. Then we see Talisa, Robb's pregnant wife, being repeatedly stabbed in the belly, a shocking act of violence against not just a woman, but an unborn child. The camera work becomes chaotic as Stark men are slaughtered. Robb, shot with crossbow bolts, crawls to his dead wife. Catelyn, desperate, grabs Walder Frey's wife and threatens to kill her if Robb isn't spared. Walder's response, "I'll find another," perfectly captures his callousness. The final moments are devastating. Roose Bolton delivers the line, "The Lannisters send their regards," as he stabs Robb. Catelyn screams in primal grief, slits the throat of Walder's wife, and then stands in shock until her own throat is cut. The episode ends with no music, just the sound of rain, a stark contrast to the typical dramatic score, making the horror feel more real. The Red Wedding decimated House Stark and effectively ended the War of the Five Kings. Robb's death meant the North fell under Bolton control. Catelyn's death orphaned her remaining children. The Stark cause seemed lost, with their forces scattered and their leaders dead. Beyond the immediate plot impact, the Red Wedding reinforced Game of Thrones' central message. In this world, traditional heroic narratives don't apply. Robb was the young, handsome king fighting to avenge his father. In any other story, he would triumph. Instead, he died because of a political miscalculation, breaking his oath to Walder Frey. As George R.R. Martin explained, he wanted readers to fear for his characters. I think a writer, even a fantasy writer, has an obligation to tell the truth. We're all going to die. We're all going to experience death and loss. We might as well tell the truth about it. The Red Wedding was that truth, delivered with shocking brutality. Oberyn Martell's death. Some deaths are shocking because they're unexpected. Oberyn Martell's death in Season 4's The Mountain and the Viper was shocking because it was almost avoided. Victory was literally in his grasp before it was snatched away in the most gruesome manner possible. Oberyn, the charismatic Prince of Dorne, volunteered to be Tyrion's champion in his trial by combat. His opponent, Sir Gregor Clegane, the Mountain, the man who had raped and murdered Oberyn's sister Elia during the sack of King's Landing. For Oberyn, this wasn't just about saving Tyrion, it was about confession and justice. What made this fight so compelling was Oberyn's skill. Unlike previous combats where the outcome seemed inevitable, Oberyn clearly outmatched the Mountain. His speed, agility, and poisoned spear gave him every advantage. As he danced around the lumbering mountain, repeatedly wounding him while demanding a confession, victory seemed assured. Then came the turn. Oberyn, having knocked the Mountain down, circled him like a matador, demanding he say Elia's name and admit to his crimes. In his moment of triumph, he got too close. The Mountain swept his legs, pulled him down, and in one of the most graphic scenes in television history, crushed his skull with his bare hands while confessing, "I killed her children. Then I raped her. Then I smashed her head in." Like this. The visual is unforgettable. Oberyn screams, his eyes being gouged, and finally his head exploding under pressure. The camera doesn't cut away, forcing viewers to witness every horrific second. The scene then cuts to reactions. Illaria's scream of horror, Tyrion's shock, and Cersei's satisfied smile. This death had immediate consequences for Tyrion, who was now condemned to death, leading to his escape from King's Landing and the murder of his father, but it also had far-reaching political implications. Oberyn had poisoned the Mountain with manticore venom, leading to Qyburn's experiments and the creation of the undead Sir Robert Strong. More significantly, Oberyn's death enraged Dorne, and particularly the Sand Snakes, setting up future conflicts. Oberyn's death perfectly encapsulates one of Game of Thrones' recurring themes. Justice in Westeros is rarely served, and vengeance comes at a terrible price. Oberyn had won the fight but lost his life because he wanted more than victory. He wanted confession, recognition, and public justice. His death reminds us that in this world, even righteous causes can end in tragedy if pursued recklessly. As Tyrion later reflects, "I made the mistake of trusting in justice once." Oberyn's death is the perfect illustration of why such trust is misplaced in the brutal world of Game of Thrones. Tywin Lannister's death. Tywin Lannister seemed untouchable, the richest, most powerful man in Westeros, whose very name struck fear into his enemies. His death in the Season 4 finale, The Children, was shocking not just because of who killed him, but where and how it happened. After being freed from his cell by Jaime, Tyrion makes a fateful detour to the Tower of the Hand. Finding Shae in his father's bed, he strangles her in a moment of rage and heartbreak. Then, arming himself with a crossbow, he confronts his father in the most undignified setting possible, the privy. What makes this confrontation so powerful is its intimacy. After a lifetime of emotional abuse, Tyrion finally has his father at his mercy. The dialogue is electric. When Tywin dismisses Shae as a whore, Tyrion warns him not to use that word again. When Tywin does, Tyrion shoots him. Tywin's last words, "You're no son of mine," are met with Tyrion's perfect response. "I am your son. I have always been your son." The visual of Tywin Lannister, the great lion of Casterly Rock, dying on the toilet with a crossbow bolt in his gut is deliberately undignified. This man who cared so much about legacy and appearance meets his end in the most humiliating way possible. The scene is shot with minimal music, focusing instead on Charles Dance and Peter Dinklage's powerful performances. Tywin's death created a power vacuum in King's Landing. Without his guiding hand, Cersei's worst impulses went unchecked, leading to the rise of the Faith Militant and eventually her own seizure of power. The Lannister-Tyrell alliance began to fracture, and Tyrion fled to Essos, eventually becoming hand to Daenerys Targaryen, a position that would put him directly against his family. Beyond these plot implications, Tywin's death represents a key theme in Game of Thrones, the hollowness of legacy. Tywin spent his life building House Lannister's power, often through brutal means, all in service to a family name that would outlive him. Yet he dies at the hands of his own son, his body left to rot and stink up the castle, and his carefully built alliances soon crumble. As Tyrion later tells Daenerys, "I killed my father. He sentenced me to death for a crime I didn't commit, and he was fucking the woman I loved." This personal motive, rather than any grand political scheme, is what brings down the great Tywin Lannister, proving that in Westeros even the mightiest can fall because of the intimate wounds they inflict on those closest to them. Jon Snow's betrayal. Jon Snow's death at the hands of his Night's Watch brothers in the Season 5 finale, Mother's Mercy, wasn't just shocking because he was a main character. It was shocking because it came from those he trusted, men he had fought alongside and led. After becoming Lord Commander and making the controversial decision to ally with the Wildlings, Jon faces growing discontent among the Night's Watch. The final straw comes when he announces his plan to march south against Ramsay Bolton, breaking the Watch's vow of political neutrality. That night, he's lured outside by news of his uncle Benjen, only to find a sign reading, "Traitor." What makes this betrayal so powerful is its execution. One by one, his brothers stab him, each saying, "For the Watch," believing they're saving the institution they've sworn to serve. The final knife comes from Ollie, Jon's steward, a boy he had mentored after Wildlings killed his family. The personal nature of this betrayal is written across Jon's face as he whispers, "Ollie," in disbelief before being stabbed. The scene ends with Jon falling back into the snow, blood pooling beneath him in a stark contrast against the white ground. The camera lingers on his open eyes as the life drains from them, then slowly pulls back to show him alone in the snow, abandoned by the very brotherhood he tried to lead. The final shot of his blood spreading through the snow is visually striking, almost beautiful in its stark horror. Jon's death, temporary though it would prove to be, had profound implications. His resurrection by Melisandre released him from his Night's Watch vows, allowing him to leave Castle Black and reclaim Winterfell. More significantly, it changed Jon himself. He returned more somber, more fatalistic, and more willing to do whatever was necessary to defeat the White Walkers. This death and resurrection arc also reinforced Jon's parallel to legendary figures like Azor Ahai and the Prince That Was Promised, adding to the growing evidence of his special destiny. The betrayal at Castle Black became a turning point in Jon's journey from bastard to king. Beyond the plot mechanics, Jon's betrayal explores one of Game of Thrones' central questions. What happens when duty conflicts with the greater good? The men who stabbed Jon believed they were upholding their vows. Jon believed he was saving humanity from the White Walkers. Both sides acted according to their principles, yet tragedy resulted. A perfect encapsulation of the moral complexity that made Game of Thrones so compelling. Hodor's sacrifice. Not all shocking deaths in Game of Thrones came from violence or betrayal. Hodor's death in Season 6's The Door was devastating because of its sacrifice, its connection to time travel, and the heartbreaking revelation of his origin story. While Bran is green-seeing into the past, the Night King touches him in his vision, breaking the magical protection of the three-eyed Raven's cave. As White Walkers and Whites attack, Mira desperately tries to escape with the still entranced Bran, shouting at Hodor to hold the door against the undead while they flee. What follows is one of the most emotionally complex sequences in the series. As present-day Hodor holds the door against the Whites, Bran simultaneously witnesses young Hodor, then called Wylis, in the past. Through Bran's green-seeing, young Wylis experiences his own future death, causing a seizure where he repeats Mira's command, "Hold the door," which slurs into Hodor, the only word he would speak for the rest of his life. The editing of this sequence is masterful, cutting between past and present, between young Wylis's seizure and adult Hodor's sacrifice. As the Whites tear into Hodor, we understand that his entire life has been shaped by this moment, his mind broken by experiencing his own death decades before it would happen. Hodor's death is unique in Game of Thrones because it's not about politics or power, it's about pure sacrifice. This gentle giant who never harmed anyone gives his life to save his friends without hesitation. The tragedy is deepened by the revelation that Bran himself, through his time travel, was responsible for Hodor's condition. This death had profound implications for Bran's character. The knowledge that his abilities could affect the past, and that he had inadvertently ruined Hodor's life, forced him to confront the enormous responsibility of his powers. It marked a turning point in his transformation from Bran Stark to the Three-Eyed Raven. Beyond the immediate story impact, Hodor's death explores themes of predestination and free will. Was Hodor always destined to die this way? Did he have any choice in his sacrifice? The closed time loop suggests a universe where past, present, and future exist simultaneously, raising philosophical questions rarely addressed in fantasy television. As director Jack Bender explained, the fact that Hodor has been saying Hodor all along because he knew he was going to be sacrificing himself for Bran at some point in the future, that's a pretty amazing concept. This conceptual depth, combined with the emotional impact of losing such a beloved character, made Hodor's death one of the most discussed and mourned in the entire series. These 6 deaths represent just the beginning of Game of Thrones' brutal journey. Each death changed the story in fundamental ways, reinforcing the show's central message. In the Game of Thrones, no one is safe, and actions have consequences that can't be undone. What makes these deaths so impactful isn't just their shock value, but how they serve the story and themes. Ned's death established that honor can be a liability. The Red Wedding showed the consequences of breaking oaths. Oberyn's death demonstrated the cost of vengeance. Tywin's murder revealed how personal grudges can topple empires. Jon's betrayal explored the conflict between duty and the greater good, and Hodor's sacrifice examined the nature of destiny itself. Game of Thrones revolutionized television by treating death not as a season finale gimmick, but as a natural consequence of characters' choices and the brutal world they inhabit. These deaths weren't just plot twists, they were the beating heart of a story about power, family, and survival in a world where winter is always coming. In Part 2 of this series, we'll examine 6 more shocking deaths from later seasons, including the explosive destruction of the Sept of Baelor, Littlefinger's long overdue justice, and the tragic fall of the Night King. We'll analyze how these later deaths built upon the foundation established by the ones we've discussed today, and how they contributed to the show's controversial conclusion. If you enjoyed this breakdown of Game of Thrones' most shocking deaths, hit that like button and subscribe to Explainified for more deep dives into your favorite shows. Let me know in the comments which death you found most shocking, or if there's another aspect of Game of Thrones you'd like me to explain next. Thanks for watching, and remember, Valar Morghulis, all men must die.